That's a $5 bill with all the income tax taken out of it.
David Stringbean Akeman made people laugh with his country humor, quiet charm, and unforgettable voice. To fans, he seemed like a gentleman with a simple heart and a life full of music, laughter, and old-fashioned warmth. But behind that familiar image was a story that ended in a way no one could have imagined. His wife, Estelle, was not just the woman standing beside him through the years. She was part of the quiet life he built away from the spotlight, and part of the tragedy that brought everything to a shocking end. Their lives were deeply tied together, and so were their final moments. Join us as we take a closer look at the love, life, and heartbreaking tragedy behind David Stringbean and Estelle, the poor Kentucky boy who traded chickens for a dream. David Akeman was born on June 17, 1915, in Jackson County, Kentucky. Some accounts place his birth in Annville, and each points to a poor boy growing up in rural Kentucky. Music was around him early. His father, James Akeman, played banjo at local dances, and that sound stayed with David. Before he even owned a real instrument, he made one for himself at age 7, with a shoebox and thread borrowed from his mother. By the time he was 12, he had raised prize bantam chickens and traded a pair of them for a real banjo. That trade helped shape the rest of his life. He was tall, thin, and drawn to the banjo style that later became part of his image. He started playing at local dances and quickly built a name for himself as a musician. But being known did not mean he could live on it. Work was still hard to find. Like many others in those years, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps. He spent that time building roads and planting trees. Even then, music never let go of him. He kept entering local talent contests and working with string bands around Lexington, Kentucky. He also spent years on radio station WLAP. At first, he was simply a banjo player. Then, one night changed everything. Another performer did not show up, and David was pushed into singing and doing comedy too. The crowd liked it. From then on, he was no longer just a picker. He became a man who could mix music, jokes, and character in one act. It was an early sign of the performer he would become, even if nobody yet knew how far that strange and lovable image would carry him. The night David Akeman became Stringbean. One of the biggest turns in David's life came through Asa Martin. David entered a talent contest that Martin judged. Some stories say he won. Others say he did not win but still got hired. Either way, it opened the same door. Martin brought him into the band, and during an early appearance, he forgot David's name. Looking at his tall, lanky frame, he called him Stringbean, or String Beans. The nickname fit him so well that it stayed for the rest of his career. Over time, it settled into the name people never forgot, Stringbean. He later tried to lean into another name, the Kentucky Wonder, but plain Stringbean stayed stronger. It sounded simple, odd, and perfect for him. He also started building the look that made the name even bigger. He sewed together a long striped shirt and short pants belted near the knees so his body looked even taller. He added a floppy hat, curved painted eyebrows, and a hand wave that became part of the act. Early versions of the costume even left him barefoot, pushing the hillbilly image further before he later switched to Western boots and rhinestone pants from Little Jimmy Dickens. The whole thing was funny, exaggerated, and easy to remember. Yet behind the joke was a real performer who knew how to hold attention. Around the late 1930s, he kept broadcasting on WLAP and played with several groups. He also had some success in semi-professional baseball. It was as a ball player that he first came to Bill Monroe's attention. Monroe had a private semi-pro team, And from there, he learned that David was more than a man with a glove. He was a banjo player, singer, and comic too. At a time when the banjo had almost faded from country music, old-time players like Stringbean were helping keep it alive. That made him unusual already, but his next step would place him even closer to the heart of country music history. The banjo player who helped shape bluegrass. In the early 1940s, Bill Monroe brought Stringbean fully into his group, and from 1943 to 1945, he played banjo for Monroe's band. That period matters for more than one reason. Many fans point to late 1945, when Earl Scruggs joined Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, as the beginning of bluegrass as people now know it. But before Scruggs arrived, Monroe had already been experimenting for years with sound and instruments. Stringbean was the first banjo player Monroe brought in, which makes him an important early part of bluegrass history. His style was not the fast three-finger drive Earl Scruggs later made famous. Stringbean played in older ways, using claw hammer or frailing, and also two-finger banjo with his thumb and forefinger. It had less speed and punch, but it helped open the door. He played on Monroe recordings like Goodbye Old Pal, and even if his sound belonged more to old-time mountain music than modern bluegrass, it was a stepping stone that mattered. During that same period, he also worked as half of a comedy team with Willie Egbert Westbrook. Together they performed as Stringbeans and Cousin Wilbur, often on the same bills as Monroe's band. So even while helping shape music history, he was also sharpening the comic side that would define him later. After leaving Monroe in 1945, he was replaced by Scruggs, whose different style changed the sound of the banjo forever. But Stringbean never abandoned the old approach. In fact, that old style became part of what made him special. His playing borrowed touches from his hero, Uncle Dave Macon, and held on to folk sounds that might otherwise have faded. Songs linked to him included Poor Ellen Smith, Pretty Polly, Sally Gooden, Cumberland Gap, Roving Gambler, Rye Whiskey, Herding Cattle, and Hot Corn Cold Corn, which many people do not realize he wrote himself. By then, he was more than a comic figure in odd clothes. He was preserving a piece of older country music just as the genre was starting to change around him. Stringbean, Estelle, and the simple world they loved. The year 1945 changed Stringbean in more ways than one. That same year, he married Estelle Stanfill, a Maury County native who would stay beside him for the rest of his life. People who knew them described them in warm and simple ways. Their friend Ramona Jones called them sweet, gentle people that loved nature and spent most of their free time fishing on a creek. That picture fits everything else known about them. They were not flashy people. They liked quiet things. They lived simply, hunted, fished, and stayed frugal. Even after fame arrived, they kept that way of living. They first lived in a small cabin behind Ramona's house near Baker Road, then later moved into her house after she left for Washington, D.C. in the late 1950s. Stringbean never became the kind of country star who chased luxury. He did splurge once on a Cadillac, though he is said never to have learned to drive, and they also had a color TV. Beyond that, they lived plainly. Overalls were part of his life on stage and off. Professionally, his years after Monroe kept growing. He teamed for a time with Lou Childre, became a regular on the Grand Ole Opry, and developed a close bond with Grandpa Jones. In 1946, he began working with Jones, another old-time banjo player and comedian, and the two would remain connected for years. They worked together at the Opry, later appeared together on television, and even became neighbors in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Around this period, Stringbean also came under the wing of Uncle Dave Macon, one of the Opry's biggest stars and one of his heroes. Macon told him stories, shared jokes, played songs for him, and near the end of his life gave Stringbean one of his own prized banjos. By then, Stringbean was no passing novelty. He had become one of the Opry's stars, holding on to old-time banjo and homespun comedy, while country music kept moving in newer directions. From Opry favorite to Hee Haw star. Stringbean stayed a star of the Grand Ole Opry for the rest of his life, and the 1950s made that clear. He kept audiences with the same mix that had first worked by accident years earlier. Banjo, songs, dry humor, and a look nobody could miss. His stage costume became legendary. It was silly, but it worked. He was keeping alive a style of country entertainment that felt old-fashioned even then. He also remained loyal to his old banjo sound. He did not begin recording as a solo artist until the early 1960s, when Stardom signed him. Between 1962 and 1971, he recorded 7 albums, including Old Time Pickin' and Grinnin', with Stringbean and Salute to Uncle Dave Macon. His records mixed folk songs, animal songs, tall tales, country jokes, and his old frailing and two-finger picking. He even scored country chart hits with Chewing Gum and I Wonder Where Wanda Went. Some of his best-known songs also included I'm the Man That Rose the Mule Around the World and How Many Biscuits Can You Eat? In the 1960s, renewed interest in folk music helped him again. He became popular on college campuses, where younger audiences responded to the older style he had never dropped. In 1969, Stringbean and Grandpa Jones joined the cast of Hee Haw. That show pushed him into even wider fame. He became one of its loved faces, thanks to his lanky body, puzzled look, and one-liners. He played the scarecrow in the cornfield. He also did the famous Letter from Home bit, saying he kept the letter right next to my heart before patting pocket after pocket until he found it. His calm delivery made the joke land even better. By then, Stringbean was not just surviving changes in country music. He was standing apart from them. He stayed true to the same old music, the same character, and the simple life with Estelle. And that quiet life, far from the glitter of other stars, is what makes what came later feel even heavier still. His career had given him fame, laughter, and a place in country music history. But one ordinary night was about to change everything. The last night on the Opry stage. On the night of November 10th, 1973, Stringbean was doing what people knew him for best, performing. He was at the Grand Ole Opry on the Ryman stage, telling a few short jokes and leading a sing-along. Earlier that night, he sang Y'all Come and Hillbilly Fever. Backstage, he spent time with Estelle and the Jones family. They talked about the week ahead, and everything sounded normal. Stringbean was planning to leave for a week-long hunting trip. Estelle and Ramona Jones planned to fix a special dinner for Tuesday. Nothing in those plans hinted at what was about to happen. Later, Stringbean went back on stage and performed Going to the Grand Ole Opry and Hot Corn, Cold Corn. Then came a rehearsal of one more song. The final song he sang was Lord, I'm Coming Home. The last lines were haunting in hindsight. Coming home, never more to roam/open wide, thine arms of love, Lord, I'm coming home. At the time, nobody could have known how chilling those words would later sound. To the crowd, it was just another night with Stringbean, the familiar star they had laughed with for years. Host Tex Ritter introduced him warmly and reminded the crowd that since Hee Haw, he had been playing colleges and working all over the country. On the surface, everything looked steady. He told his jokes, sang his songs, and move through the night like he had done so many times before. But while he was on stage, listening ears were waiting somewhere else, and the danger was already moving closer. It was the kind of Opry night that usually ended with people smiling, heading home and planning the next week. Stringbean had done that many times before. Estelle was there, the Jones family was there, and the routine felt safe. That matters, because the horror that followed did not grow out of chaos. It broke through an ordinary night. The rumors that followed him home. Stringbean was modest, quiet, and never flashy, but one habit followed him for years and helped put him in danger. Like many people shaped by the Great Depression, he did not trust banks. He and Estelle lived simply in their small cabin near Ridgetop, Tennessee, and people knew they were careful with money. Their only real indulgences were a Cadillac and a color TV. Beyond that, they lived frugally and stayed close to the old habits that had carried them through hard times. Gossip around Nashville said Stringbean kept large amounts of cash at home, and often carried cash on him too. He was not rich by major entertainment standards, but the rumors made people think otherwise. On that same Saturday night, while he was on stage around 10:15 p.m., two men were listening to the Opry broadcast on the radio. They wanted to rob the Akemans, and they were waiting for the right time to break in. They had heard the same stories everyone else had heard, that Stringbean never trusted banks and hid his money at home. The men searched the cabin, looking for a fortune they believed had to be there, but they could not find what they were after. Instead of leaving, they stayed. They decided they would wait for Stringbean and Estelle to return and force them to hand the money over. That choice changed everything. What had started as greed was about to turn into murder, and the couple had no idea that their quiet ride home from the Opry was leading straight into a nightmare. He and Estelle were known as people who enjoyed hunting and fishing, not luxury. That made the rumors stranger. The story of hidden money traveled farther than the truth of their daily life. To thieves, rumor was enough. They did not need proof. They only needed belief. And belief was now sitting inside the home with guns. The horror waiting inside the cabin. At about 10:40 p.m., Stringbean and Estelle left the Opry and drove the roughly 30 minutes back home. When they pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. Stringbean had rigged his own simple burglar alarm using a piece of fishing line stretched across the driveway, and he could see that it had been triggered. He knew at once that someone had been there. He armed himself with the .22 he carried for protection and moved toward the house. Estelle followed behind him. Inside, two cousins, 23-year-olds John Brown and Marvin Douglas Brown, were waiting. They had already torn the cabin apart while searching for hidden cash. When Stringbean entered, he saw the intruders and appeared to have offered some resistance. One of the men shot him. Estelle heard the shots and chaos. According to later accounts, she ran and screamed for help. She begged for her life, but she was chased down and shot too. One account says she was shot about 40 yards from the front door. Another said she was shot in the back of the head after running toward the road. The killers took only a small amount of money, some firearms, and a chainsaw. In some accounts, they also drove away in the couple's own car or station wagon. They had come looking for a fortune, but they missed cash that was still on the couple and hidden elsewhere. What they left behind was far worse than the robbery they had planned. By morning, Nashville would wake up to news that felt almost impossible to believe. Later records made clear that the two men had learned the couple's habits and timed the break-in carefully. They listened to the Opry broadcast so they would know when David was still on stage. That detail made the crime colder. This was not panic. It was waiting, watching, and planning inside the home of people who had simply gone to work. The morning that broke country music's heart. The next morning, the bodies of David and Estelle Akeman were found by their friend and neighbor, Grandpa Jones. He had come over because he and Stringbean had planned a hunting trip. Instead, he found a scene that would stay with people for years. The murders shocked Nashville and hit country music hard. Friends could barely process what had happened. On a WSMAM radio special a week later, Grandpa Jones said, "They were just about as happy a couple as I'd ever seen. I think they suited each other the best of any two people I've ever seen." Buck Owens said, "If you knew Stringbean, you had to said, 'For a year, I could hardly talk about it. It was devastating, a sad time, a trying time. I don't think you ever get over something like that. Our lives were never the same after that." The murders did more than cause grief. They shook the feeling of safety around Nashville. People began to say this crime changed the way country stars lived. Some moved away. Some changed where they lived in Tennessee. Others started looking over their shoulders. The old world of handshakes, promises, and open trust no longer felt the same. And as the shock spread through Music City, investigators were already trying to answer the question everyone was asking: who did this? Steve Gibson later said, "The murders changed Nashville because people suddenly had to rethink the world around them." What had once felt like a small town inside the music business now felt exposed. The crime did not only take two lives, it damaged a way of living. The grief was personal, but fear spread, and that is why the case stayed. The arrests and the trial. Police began digging into the case, and the investigation led to cousins John A. Brown and Marvin Douglas Brown. A reward of $25,000 was offered for information, and a tip from a convict who negotiated a reduced sentence helped move the case forward. The Browns had ransacked the cabin looking for hidden money. At trial, each man blamed the other for the killings, but the evidence tied them both to the crime. Grandpa Jones gave important testimony, including identifying one of the stolen firearms in their possession as a gun he had given Stringbean. The motive that came through was robbery. Later accounts also said alcohol and drugs played a role in what happened that night. In November 1974, both men were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, or in one account, a total sentence of 198 years. Marvin Brown later tried to fight his conviction in the appeals courts. In 1982, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the decision against him and denied him a new trial. He later gave an exclusive interview and admitted his part in the burglary and murders, though he insisted John Brown fired the fatal shots. Legally, that did not free him from guilt. Because he had taken part in the felony that ended in death, he was still guilty of murder under Tennessee's felony murder rule. The courtroom had settled the legal part, but outside it, one strange part of the story still kept growing: the money everyone believed Stringbean had hidden. The trial also pulled painful details into public view. Testimony showed how little the killers actually got for what they had done. They had come in expecting riches and left behind a crime that horrified the country music world. Even after the verdict, the brutality of the murders stayed at the center of the story. Prison terms answered the law, not heartbreak. The cash they never found. The cruelest twist in the case was that the killers never found what they had come for. When David and Estelle were murdered, they had cash on them that the Browns somehow missed. One account said they had a combined $5,700 in cash. Another said the killers missed money hidden in Stringbean's overalls and in Estelle's clothing. Some reports said the amount they actually got away with was only about $208 or $250, along with a chainsaw, bags, and guns. Investigators also found money hidden in places around the cabin, including boots, walls, and the chimney. Rumors that the Akemans had been hiding money for years suddenly seemed true. People began to wonder how much had really been there and how much might still be hidden. Some stories claimed about $20,000 was found in the house after the murders. Then, in 1996, another story gave the case a strange afterlife. New owners of the old home reportedly found about $20,000 more hidden behind a loose brick in the chimney, or during wall work in the cabin. The money had been damaged badly by time, dampness, and rodents, and it was useless by then. Some reports said that story was never fully verified, but it became part of the legend all the same. It was proof, or at least powerful evidence, that Stringbean's old distrust of banks had been real. The very money the killers hunted had stayed hidden, while 2 lives were lost for it. And sadly, the deaths did not bring peace even to what the couple left behind. That is one reason the story kept sounding almost unreal. What the killers failed to find did not just deepen the mystery. It also helped spark a long and bitter fight after David and Estelle were gone. The pain did not end with their deaths. David and Estelle had no children and no will, which meant their deaths led to long legal fights between relatives on both sides. Claims were made over their property and belongings, and those disputes became even more tangled as new reports of hidden cash kept surfacing. In the end, most of the property and belongings were awarded to Estelle's family, but the process was bitter and difficult. The couple were buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Gardens in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Their loss was felt not only in courtrooms and at funerals, but also on television screens and country stages. Hee Haw kept airing Stringbean's taped segments after his death, and his final episode was broadcast on March 23, 1974. During the rest of the show's production, the Scarecrow was left as a memorial. The case was later profiled on an episode of City Confidential in 1999, keeping the story alive for a new audience. Music kept his memory alive, too. Bluegrass artist Sam Bush recorded The Ballad of Stringbean and Estelle for his 2009 album Circles Around Me. The song, written by Bush, Guy Clark, and Verlon Thompson, was later nominated by the International Bluegrass Music Association for Song of the Year in 2011. Even decades later, the murders still carried a weight that had not faded. But one more chapter was still ahead, and it reopened old anger all over again. In a painful way, the memorials and songs showed that people were still trying to process what had happened. Stringbean had made audiences laugh for years, so remembering him through silence, music, and old television clips carried a different sadness. Even the smallest reminders, like the scarecrow left standing, felt loaded. They kept his face and absence in the same place. Their story kept echoing long after the burials. The parole decision that reopened old wounds. Time passed, but the case never fully loosened its grip. Marvin Brown died in prison in 2003. John Brown remained behind bars for decades. In July 2008, Tennessee's parole board delayed his parole again. District Attorney Tory Johnson argued fiercely against letting him go, saying, "In certain instances, there are certain types of crimes that you just simply can't pay the debt you can't atone for. It was so deliberate, so intentional, so premeditated, that anybody that thinks like that doesn't need to be out, ever." But in October 2014, after multiple attempts and a psychological review, John Brown was granted parole by a 4-to-1 vote. He had asked for forgiveness, and said he had spent 40 years trying to change his life. He was released after serving 41 years. The decision upset many of Stringbean's friends. Mac Wiseman called it a great miscarriage of justice and said, "I fully believe that the good Lord forgives us for our mistakes, but the parole board members don't have the authority, spiritually or otherwise, to forgive that man." Joan Shepherd said, "Why should they turn him loose? He cold-bloodedly killed 2 friends of ours. I'm sure the Lord will forgive him. I don't think any of us will." Yet while those arguments continued, Stringbean's name lived on in a different way too. In June 2015, his family honored what would have been his 100th birthday with a 3-day festival in Kentucky. His nephew Philip Akeman said, "He was a mountain boy and he had a dream." The release did not close anything for the people who had loved David and Estelle. It reopened old pain and forced their friends to speak about the crime again. But the memory of Stringbean was never only tied to the murder. It also stayed tied to his music, his humor, and the life he shared with Estelle. That is what made loss hard to set aside. Do you think justice was truly served in David Stringbean and Estelle's case? Or did John Brown's release reopen a wound that should never have been touched? When you think of Stringbean today, do you remember him more for the tragic way his life ended, or for the music, laughter, and legacy he left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.